So welcome in this video. What we're going to be seeing today is the authorless act, which you might know as flow state. So let's see the overview very briefly. First, we're going to be seeing the authorship problem. Then the guy who invented this term flow state, which is Csikszentmihalyi. And then we're going to be seeing the neuroscience of flow state and even the mystics around flow state, because some guys thousands of years ago got to the same conclusions as we got using science. So we're going to be seeing that. Then we're going to be seeing the architecture of flow state from an experienced point of view, like what you feel like when you are in a flow state. Then we're going to be seeing what makes it impossible for you to enter a flow state. And at the end of the video, we're going to be seeing the paradox that stands in the middle of flow state. We're going to make sense of that. And finally, I'll tell you how to integrate flow in a normal life and what to do as soon as you get out of flow state. There is a moment, and if you have ever been truly alive in your work, you know this moment, when you stop existing as a person and you become the thing that you're doing. The surgeon does not hold the scalpel, he is the scalpel. The jazz musician does not play the notes, he becomes the music. The programmer does not write code, he inhabits it, a ghost moving through logic, sensing the architecture the way a swimmer feels water. And these are not just metaphors, these are neurobiological events. And these are the most important states that a human being can enter. This state has a name, it's flow state. And understanding it, not just reading about it, but grasping its mechanics and making it deliberate, is the difference between a life spent at the surface and a life lived at depth. So let's see the first principle. In this lecture, we're going to be seeing a lot of principles. As soon as we finish a chapter, we're going to end with a principle. So the first principle is inside you, there is a level of performance that your self-consciousness has never allowed out. Flow is what happens when you finally get out of the way. And you'll understand what this means in a second. So let's see the guy who even invented this concept. In the 70s, this guy called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi pronounced Csikszentmihalyi, a fact that the universe arranged with deliberate irony, began interviewing rock climbers, chess grandmasters, surgeons, and artists, asking each the same question: what does it feel like when it is going perfectly? The answers were remarkably consistent across cultures, disciplines, and centuries. People described complete absorption in the task, a distorted sense of time, hours that collapse into minutes, a loss of self-consciousness, actions that felt automatic, almost effortless, a type of enjoyment unlike any other pleasure they knew. This guy named the state flow and spent 40 years mapping it. And his conclusions are what we call today our second principle of this lecture, which is happiness is just a byproduct of absorption, not a destination that you navigate toward. So let's see the neuroscience behind disappearing into your work. When you enter a flow state, your brain does some sort of magic trick. The prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of your inner critic, the self-monitor, the ruminator, it goes quiet. And this is called transient hypofrontality, the temporary suppression of the region which is most associated with self-referential thought. You can't think to yourself without a prefrontal cortex. Your inner narrator, the voice that says, you are not good enough, what will they think, are you doing this right? It literally switches off. And the self does not just dissolve, it recedes into the background. It lets you function without interference. Any form of self-doubt disappears, because as soon as your ego disappears, every form of self-doubt disappears as well. Any form of insecurity just comes from yourself. And this is why flow feels so good, because you are getting out of the way. And you might think that this is bad, but this is actually what you are looking for. You're so self-centered that you struggle, you suffer. Every form of suffering comes from thinking about yourself. What happens neurochemically is this. These 5 neurochemicals flood your nervous system simultaneously. The first one is norepinephrine, which sharpens focus and accelerates information processing across neural networks. The second is dopamine, which makes pattern recognition hyper-acute, meaning Connections that are usually invisible to the ordinary mind now become vivid, meaning you see more patterns. Then we have anandamide, which comes from the Sanskrit word ananda, which means bliss. And this particular chemical makes it possible for you to have lateral thinking, linking ideas that are very far away one from each other. As soon as you get out of the flow state, you then have an increase of serotonin, which gives you a sort of quiet certainty that what you did was actually good and now you feel fine. Then you have endorphins, which reduce the pain. Because remember, flow state is not about doing easy things, it's about doing hard things, but feeling like they are effortless, although they aren't. So, in flow state, you are a sort of chemically different creature, faster, sharper, more creative, and more alive. Some studies even claim that your ability to solve problems can increase by more than 400%, which is just crazy. One more thing about the neuroscience of flow state is that flow produces theta brainwaves, which is the same frequency that you have in the state between waking and sleep. The ones that are associated with profound insights, the same frequency that meditators spend years trying to summon deliberately. And the result is what we're going to be seeing: crazy performance and the feeling of effortless action. The third principle, which also explains the title of this lecture, is the ego is not the source of your best performance. It's just a noise that your performance must overcome. You do your best work when you disappear. And even though this sounds mystical, this is actual neuroscience. So let's see the mystics, because some of you have already noticed that this is very similar to a ton of mystical concepts. So the first one is Wu Wei, which is a concept taken from Taoism, a philosophy that was born in China and produced some of the best insights ever. This word is commonly mistranslated as non-action, but it is better understood as action without contrivance, which means moving in such a perfect alignment with the nature of things that effort becomes invisible, even to the actor. And this sounds like flow state. The ideogram combines Wu, which is a negation, with Wei, which means deliberate, self-conscious striving. It is not the absence of doing, it is the absence of doing, the meta layer of self-monitoring that slows and distorts skilled action. Zhuangzi parable of cook Ding illustrates this precisely. The cook has butchered so many oxen that his knife never touches the bone. It works through the spaces that are already there, following the animal's natural structure. I glide through great joints or cavities, as there may be, according to the natural constitution of the animal. He has internalized the structure so completely that volition disappears. His skill has become instinct. The Taoists understood what neuroscience later confirmed. Past a certain threshold of mastery, the deliberate mind becomes an obstacle rather than a guide. You become an obstacle rather than a guide. Instinct beats ego. This is both a neuroscientific truth and a mystical truth. Wu Wei is what happens when learning finishes and the body takes over. Let's see the next one, which comes from Sufism, which is a sort of mystical tradition from Islam. This word means annihilation, which means the ego's dissolution in complete absorption. When you are completely absorbed, you disappear. Rumi and Hafiz wrote endlessly about this vanishing, the drop becoming the ocean, the lover becoming love itself. And these guys had precise techniques for inducing this state: meditation, breathing, and chanting. In modern terms, they were sort of engineering a flow state in order for them to touch the divine in a much more efficient and pure way. And then we have Mushin, which is a concept that comes from the famous Japanese samurai Miyamoto Musashi. This concept literally means no mind. So the swordsman in Miyamoto Musashi's thinking does not think about cutting, about doing the action. He wrote in the Book of the Five Rings, think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world, which means transfer your attention from yourself to the action you're doing. The best way to learn something and to take it to the next level is to stop worrying about yourself and start thinking about the action. This is how you achieve mastery. When self-importance decreases, absorption increases. And the last one comes from the Indian yoga tradition, which finds three types of attention: dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. And the kind of thing that you are striving to is samadhi, which is becoming one with the object. And in this case, we are not talking about making the ego completely disappear. Yourself doesn't have to disappear in this tradition. It just has to become so thin that it becomes transparent. It doesn't disturb you. This guy understood that total ego dissolution can be fine, but it leads to a sort of state of trance more than excellence. Flow state requires the prefrontal cortex to quiet down a bit, but not completely shut off. Because if you completely shut off the prefrontal cortex, you also lose the ability to produce great outcomes, and you get into a sort of more mystical state where you don't even think you exist. But this is not what we are striving to in flow state. We are simply striving to put the ego aside. So it's not completely true that you are trying to kill your ego during flow. You are trying to make it less relevant. You're trying to focus on the thing ahead of you without your ego disturbing you in this action. So even the ancient Greeks had a word that comes really close to flow state, which is enthusiasmos, which comes from the word en, which means in, and theos, which just means God. To be enthusiastic was literally to be inhabited by a divine presence. The poet Hesiod describes the Muses descending to him on Mount Helicon and breathing a divine force into him, not teaching him to compose, but speaking through him. Even the philosopher Socrates spoke about his daimon, an inner presence that was neither quite himself nor external, that guided him away from error with uncanny precision. These were not naive claims of divine possession. They were the Greeks' best attempt to describe a real inner experience. That peak creative work feels like it's received, like you are listening to something bigger than yourself. And even if you're not religious, this stays true because when your ego sort of goes into the background, you are more prone to listen to your best intuitions. And you can see this both from a spiritual perspective and a neuroscientific perspective. This is why I've written this lecture in the first place. I want to make understand people that this can be seen like a mystical state or like a neuroscientific, neurobiologically grounded state. It's up to you, but it works. It exists. This is what I do in this channel. This is what I help people achieve in their daily lives. And I guarantee you, you've lived flow at least once in your life. And trust me, you want to live it again. So if you're interested in that, you can schedule a free call with the links down below. So let's see the fourth principle. Every civilization that looked carefully at human excellence found the same state. The gods are what ancient people called the prefrontal cortex going quiet. So now let's see the architecture of flow state from a more psychological perspective. You can see this graph right here. So you have two axes. The first one is about the skill level that you have, how good you are at doing what you're doing. And the other axis is the challenge level, meaning how hard the task you are doing actually is. And as you can see, flow state is in the middle of this graph. Like you need the challenge level to be proportionate to your abilities. You need the task to be slightly more difficult than your current abilities. Because when the task is too hard for your abilities, you feel anxiety. And when your abilities are too high, meaning that the task is too easy for you, you feel boredom. Flow state stands in the middle of anxiety and boredom. And this is so true. You can see it in your life. I mean, if you've never written in your whole life, trying to write a book is going to be a huge step ahead. And this might overwhelm you and give you anxiety. If instead you start by writing a short piece of text, which is like a lecture, like the one you're seeing right now, it will be easier and it will be easier for you to enter a flow state. Flow comes when you make the perfect balance between challenge and ability levels. The next prerequisite of flow state is crystal clear goals. Flow state demands that you know what you're doing, not the ultimate purpose of your life, although this is necessary as well. I just mean the next move, the next sentence. The chess player doesn't need to know the meaning of chess. He just needs to know which square to move to. You cannot enter flow by having vague goals, like I need to write a novel. You need to define the structure of what you're doing. And once you have crystal clear goals for your session, it will be easier to enter flow. The next one is immediate feedback. The brain's dopamine system is not a reward machine. It is more like a prediction error machine. Dopamine neurons fire not when something good happens, but when something better than expected happens. And they fall silent when something worse than expected happens. So the brain is constantly placing bets on your immediate future. And the neurotransmitter that drives motivation and attention is the continuous accounting of whether those bets are being won or lost. So this is a step ahead than the way in which you usually look at the dopamine system. It has to do with rewards, but this is a much more um, meaningful perspective to look at this. So flow state requires this system to be engaged. And how do you get it engaged? The only way is to receive feedback fast enough that predictions and their corrections form an unbroken loop. Rock climbing is a near perfect example of an activity that is perfect for flow state because the feedback is constant. It arrives in milliseconds. If you are doing something wrong, you'll know because you'll fall. This is how clear the activity is. Even surgery goes the same way. The surgeon always knows if he's doing well because he can see it immediately. So, um, knowledge workers struggle with flow partly because this feedback loop is broken. It's a lot harder to have feedback, for example, when you're writing. For example, if you're writing something, you don't have immediate feedback like a surgeon or a rock climber has. So, what you need to do is engineering artificial feedback loops. You need to track what you're doing in real time, which doesn't mean correcting what you're doing. This just means understanding whether the direction you're going in is fine or not. And the last one is the most obvious, but I had to tell you, you can't multitask your way into flow. Obviously, you need to have one single task in front of you and to cut out everything around you that is not relevant for what you're doing. So let's see the fifth principle. Flow state lives exactly at the intersection of who you are and what you are attempting. Too little challenge and you drift. Too much and you freeze. The zone of flow state is narrow and it moves continually as you grow, which is the reason why flow can be hard. Because if you increase the challenge too much, you feel anxiety. If you don't increase the challenge enough, you feel boredom. So let's see what blocks flow state. The biggest enemy is ego. The desire to look good while doing something prevents full absorption in the thing. You cannot simultaneously perform for an audience and disappear into the work. The moment you think, how am I doing? You exit flow. The moment you think, what will they think? The doors of flow state close. This explains a strange phenomenon. Beginners sometimes enter flow state more easily. They are too inexperienced to be self-conscious, and the very advanced enter flow state easily as well. They are too competent to doubt themselves. The intermediate is the hell of being self-aware, because you know just enough to know that you are doing it wrong. The remedy is just like the Sufis called it, tawakkul, which means radical surrender. You sort of release your attachment to the outcome while remaining entirely committed to the action. Difference between an ego-oriented performer and a flow state master is one acts in order to be seen, the other acts until seeing disappears. Be the doing, not the doer. Become the action. So how do you actually enter a flow state? Flow state cannot be forced, but you can create the conditions for it to arise. So the first one is having a ritual. The writer who begins every morning at the same desk with the same cup of coffee, writing by hand before even turning on his phone, has a ritual. And what he's actually doing is reducing the friction. When you make it easier to focus, you focus more. which sounds obvious, but you gotta be extreme on that. You gotta create extreme rituals. Kant used to walk the same path at the same hour every day for years, and he wrote maybe the most important philosophy books ever written. So inspiration doesn't just come naturally. You need to create the conditions in which inspiration can actually come to you. The next principle is depth before breadth. You cannot sprint into flow. Research on elite performance reveals a characteristic warm-up pattern. Something that all top performers agree on is that the first moments of a performance which is lived in a flow state are more shallow, meaning you don't enter flow immediately. As soon as you start working on something, you always have a sort of warm up period where you're not completely focused on the thing, but you're sort of winning the friction of starting. But once you get past this threshold of pain, you actually experience the best state ever, which is flow. It's sort of a price of admission. The next one is single tasking as a whole life philosophy. Close all the other tabs. Put the phone in another room. Tell people that you will be unavailable for a couple of hours. The Sufis had the tradition of khalwa, which means solitude or seclusion. It was a form of intentional solitude to produce maximum inspiration and contact with the divine. By the way, I've noticed that the video is getting a bit too long, so I'm gonna go faster and skip this. So the next one is raising the stakes. When your consequences are high, you focus a lot better, which just means when you are playing a piano concert in front of hundreds of people, adrenaline compresses your focus. When the stakes are high, it's a lot easier to focus. So if you manufacture stakes in your own life, deadlines, public commitments, audiences, bets, your focus can't help but increase. You don't need to overdo this because, as we said, when you have too much stress, flow disappears. But when you add the right type of stress, you actually increase your performance and your focus. And the last one is following curiosity. Doing what matters is necessary. There are things that have just more leverage, but you should optimize both for leverage and for curiosity. You sort of need to align results with curiosity, because if you over optimize for results, you lose the very same thing that you were looking to increase, which is fulfillment. So the sixth principle is do not ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. The world needs more people who have come alive. The paradox at the center of flow state. This state produces your best work, but you cannot access flow by trying to produce your best work. You can't force it. The direct pursuit of excellence blocks excellence. The desire to have a flow experience blocks the flow experience, which sound very sus, since I coach people on how to enter a flow state. But you cannot will yourself into the vanishing. You can only create the conditions, the right challenge, the clear goal, the single focus, and then the outcome comes. And this is what I do in my coaching program. Like, if you force yourself to enter a flow state, you won't enter a flow state. You just create the conditions and then it gradually comes. You gradually become better at it. It happens more frequently. But you can't force it. You just create the condition. Just like you create the right soil for the right plant. This is not just mysticism. It is what every serious flow researcher confirms. This state is autotelic, which comes from the Greek words autos, which means itself, and telos, which is and, which means you are driven by the activity itself, not any external reward. And there is this interesting study done in the 70s where they selected children who already loved drawing. They did it freely, spontaneously, with obvious joy. And one group was given a sort of award for being good at drawing, and another group was given no reward. So later, when both groups were placed in a room with drawing materials and no reward, the children who had been rewarded showed dramatically and measurably less interest in drawing than those who had never been rewarded at all. The reward had quietly rewritten the brain's model of the activity. By rewarding the children for drawing, the experimenters had communicated, this is the kind of thing you do for external reasons. And so the brain sort of updated his own principles. And when the external reason disappeared, so did the motivation. This is called over-justification effect. The reward does not add intrinsic motivation, it kills it. When you add too many rewards to your activities, you stop doing them for the sake of doing them. You start doing them to get the reward. Flow is what happens when you do the thing for the thing's sake, when the activity is its own reward, when there is no destination because the journey is the destination. The Zen saying has it right: before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. The activity does not change. It's just about the absorption. You don't need to add any external reward. The activity is the reward. And this is something that will sound so mystical, but if you start living like that, you will never come back. So the seventh principle is mastery is not the accumulation of skill. Mastery is the accumulation of moments of complete presence and complete autotelic motivation, which is motivation that comes from within, from the activity. Csikszentmihalyi also was not just talking about productivity. He was talking about happiness. If you read the book, you know that the biggest topic of the book is happiness itself. To test his discoveries, he developed the experience sampling method, a technique as simple as radical. Participants were given electronic pages programmed to beep at random intervals throughout the day, roughly 8 times across waking hours, for a week or more. At each beep, wherever they were, at work, at dinner, on the commute, in bed, they filled out a brief questionnaire. What are you doing right now? Who are you with? What are you thinking about? How do you feel? Activation, happiness, creativity, motivation. All these variables were rated in real time. So this was done with thousands of people. And what emerged, the finding that emerged, is that people consistently reported higher engagement and deeper satisfaction at work than during free time, than during leisure. It was so counterintuitive that it required this real-time methodology to be believed. People said they wanted more free time. But when that free time actually arrived, they were bored, restless, and less alive. And I know that this is your experience as well, guys, because we all say that we want more rest, but this is not what we want. We want more challenge, but the right type of challenge. Challenge that deeply satisfies us because we have autotelic motivation, because the motivation for doing it comes from within. We do not want rest, we want the right kind of effort. This reframes everything. Your goal should not be to make your life easier. Your goal should be to find the right type of work. Work that is hard enough to demand everything that you have, easy enough so that you don't collapse, clear enough that you know where you're going, immediate enough so that you can feel yourself getting there. A life structured around flow is not a life of constant ecstasy, like people want to make you believe. Flow is not ecstasy. When you are in flow, you don't feel like happy in the traditional sense. Flow makes you happy in the long run because you just feel like you have a mission and you stop thinking so much about yourself and you just start noticing the world around you. So let's do the final chapter because every session of flow state ends, just like everything beautiful in life. And what happens is the world rushes back in. So notifications, the hunger for more, the awareness of time, your own ego, the ordinary thickness of reality. And oftentimes there is a period of mild melancholy, even desolation, as the neurochemical cocktail that we have seen before metabolizes. So what I'll tell you is this is not failure. This is the cost of having been somewhere extraordinary. Sometimes you'll feel great after, sometimes you'll feel tired or melancholic. But like, this is not the point. Every time you enter a flow state, it leaves traces in you. Whether you are a musician, a painter, a writer, a sculptor, every time you enter flow, it changes you forever. Flow is not just what you produce in the state, it is who you become because of the state. It's kind of ironic. You're trying to get out of yourself, But the consequence of getting out of yourself is improving yourself, improving your identity. The best way to change your identity is by forgetting about your identity. This is so ironic, and I hope that after being for so many minutes with me, you now understand why I call it the authorless act. This is the ironical part. You produce your best work when you're not so self-centered. You become a different person for having vanished, and each vanishing teaches you how to vanish more skillfully, which means every time you enter flow, you will be able to disappear in the process a little bit better. This is the practice, not even the achievement, not the state itself, the practice of returning again and again to the edge where you're stretched and not snapped. When you know what you're trying to do without knowing if you'll succeed. When the inner critic disappears for a moment and for a couple of hours you become what you're doing. The Sufis had a saying that goes like this: die before you die and discover that there is no death. They simply mean you need to dissolve your ego before circumstance dissolves it for you. And what you discover is that what remains, the clear, competent, absorbed consciousness that watches through your eyes, is not diminished by the dissolution. It is liberated by it. When you vanish, you become free. The final principle is the good life is not a life that feels good. It is a life that feels fully inhabited, fully lived, fully stressed to your maximum potential. You are most yourself when you are least aware of yourself. So disappear accordingly. Guys, thank you so much for staying till the end. I really hope that this was useful to you, and this was the first time ever that I recorded this type of video where I wrote a lecture and I just read it and explained it. So if you like this type of format, please comment, because I need to know if this makes sense or I should come back to doing the usual type of video where I just talk to the camera in a more free way. Just let me know what you think about this. And like I told you, if you want personalized help to apply all of these in your own life, you can schedule a call with the first link down below. And you can also do my 2-minute flow state questionnaire where I'll ask you just a couple of questions to make you understand at which stage you are in the process of becoming a flow state master. And as usual, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.